We continue now at the top of Daf Mem Beis Amud Beis in Meseches Kiddushin. This is Kiddushin Daf 42b. On the previous Amud, the Gemara had a contradiction within Rav Nachman whether he employs the principle of Ma Koach Bezdin Yofe, and the Gemara says it's not difficult. Ha de to, ha de lo to. In one case, we're talking where the Bezdin made a mistake. If the Bezdin made an error, so then the people are able to protest. We do not employ the principle of Ma Koach Bezdin Yofe. And Rashi says ha de to, ha de piches shesuso hosir. That's talking about the Mishnah, which was talking about Bezdin when they make an evaluation on a piece of property. If they're off by a sixth in either direction, so in that case they made a mistake. So there we're able to protest the decision of Bezdin. However, in the other case, Hadaloto, that's talking about a situation where there was no mistake. That was talking about a situation of an apotropos on behalf of the Yisomim, and then the Yisomim grow up. There, Rav Nachman say that we do apply the principle of Ma Koach Bezdin Yofe, and the Yisomim are not able to protest. The Gemara says Idaloto, but if there was no mistake made by the Bezdin, Ma Yecholim Limcho. So what does it mean they're able to protest according to the other opinion? We quoted Shmuel's opinion that the Yisomim are able to protest. What are they protesting if there was no mistake that was made? And the Gemara says to that, Yecholim Limchos Beruchos. They're able to protest when it comes to the various sides of whatever property they inherited. There was no mistake, but perhaps they wanted a different specific portion of property. Rashi says, Beruchos Mishanafa Lo Chelik Bedarim. For example, somebody gets his portion in the south. Omer, he might say, Noach Li Chelik B'tzaf, and I wanted to have a portion in the north. Shahaisa Lo Sham Sada Smucha Lo Shanafla Lo Me'ima. Maybe he had another field over there that belonged to him, that came to him from his mother's side, and therefore he wants that other portion. And so that's why Shmuel said in that case the Yisomim are able to protest. Again, Rav Nachman himself said that's not true. We employ the principle of Ma Koach Bezdin Yofe, but Rav Nachman would agree in a situation where the Bezdin made a mistake. There we do not apply the principle of Ma Koach Bezdin Yofe, and it is possible to protest the decision of Bezdin. And the Gemara continues that the two dots, some Rav Nachman says, Ha'achen shecholku, when brothers divide property, let's say two brothers inherit property, Harehein kelakucho, so the division of the property, they're considered like purchasers. It's considered like they're buying the property one from the other when they are dividing the property. And the Gemara continues, Pachos mishasus, therefore, let's say they make a mistake, but that mistake is less than 1/6. So nikna mekach, so then the sale is good. That's true by any sale, and it's true when brothers divide property as well. And similarly, Yeser al shasus, let's say the mistake is more than 1/6. Batal mekach, so then the sale is batal, the sale is nullified. That division is not a good division. And shasus, if it's exactly a mistake by 1/6, kana, so then the acquisition is a good acquisition, umachzer ona, but that extra amount, that 1/6, that ona has to be returned. The amount of the fraud has to be returned from one brother to the other. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rava says, Hadamran pachos mishasos nikna mekach. When we say that if it's less than 1/6, then the mekach is good, lo amran ela de lo shavya shliach. That's only true if, let's say, one of the brothers didn't appoint a shliach in order to divide up the property on his behalf. Avol shavya shliach, but if the person appoints a shliach, so then there's a rule by shlichus that says even if it's less than 1/6, the person is able to say that the mekach doesn't go through. Because the person can say, L'sakune shadartich, I sent you as my shliach for my benefit. V'lo la'avuse, I didn't send you for my detriment. Meaning to say, the person who sent the shliach, let's say that person who ended up losing out in this deal, even if he lost out less than 1/6, but if he lost out and he lost out because he sent a shliach, and that shliach negotiated a deal where he lost out, then the person can say, I only appointed the shliach to be for my benefit. If I'm losing out through the shlichus is not considered a shlichus at all, and there was no valid negotiation. And the Gemara continues, that which we say, that let's say you have a purchase and it's more than 1/6 of a mistake, so then we say the purchase is nullified. Lo amran, we only say that ela de lo amran nifligin b'shuma, where they didn't say ahead of time, let's divide b'shuma deveidina, with the evaluation of the court. Avol amar, but let's say the person said, niflog b'shuma deveidina, we're going to divide up this property according to the way the court evaluates the property. So then even if there was a mistake of more than 1/6, mechron kayim, then we still say the sale is good, we still say the division is good. The Tanan, as we learned in the Mishnah, this is the Mishnah we quoted on the previous Amud, Shum hadayonim, if the court evaluates something, shepichso shasus, o hosiru shasus, if they're less by 1/6, they're more by 1/6, mechron batal, so the Tanakama says that the sale is nullified. However, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, mechron kayim, that sale is good. Again, as we said before, according to Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, the idea is that we employ the principle of ma koach bezdin yaf. If you're using the bezdin, so then then it's considered to be valid. And further, the Gemara says, that which we say that when the brothers divide the property, if there's a mistake of exactly a sixth, so then the division is valid, but the part of the fraud, the amount of the fraud, has to be returned. That's only true by movable property. But if you're talking about land, Ein ona lekarkos. There is no ona when it comes to land. And the Gemara continues, uvemekarkoi lo amr. Now, when we say that by land there's no ona, that's only stated ela de plug beiluya, when they divide the land according to their value. In other words, if they made certain valuation of the property and then they find out that it was wrong, then we say ein ona lekarkos. We don't apply the principle of ona. Avol plug b'mishchas alo. But if they were dividing by measurements and they made a mistake in measuring the land, there we actually do say that we retract the division. It's not a good division. Kedirabba, that follows what Rabbah said. Diyama Rabbah, because Rabbah said, Kol davar shebemidav shebemishkol v'shebeminyan. Anything involving measurements or weights or numbers, afilu pachos michdei ona, even if it's a mistake of less than the normal amount that we apply ona, nami choser, we still retract in that situation because that's already a mistake by a measurement. That already goes back. That's not considered to be valid. And Rashi explains, Harehein kilakuchos kachadinon shalakuchos katsuv v'perak hazav. In Baba Metzia we have the rules of ona by lakuchos, by purchasers, and the point of the Gemara here is that applies by the brothers who are dividing property as well. Hachi garsinan v'adamran yesar shasos badal megach lo amran el delo amran niflog b'shum dveidina. The Gemara said when we say if it's a mistake of more than a sixth, the whole thing is batal. That's only true if they weren't going through the courts. But if they were going through the evaluation of the courts, it's not batal. Hadamar yesar al shasos badal chalukah legamri lo amran el shelo hisnu mitchil. That's only true again if they did not use a court. But if they said we're going to use the evaluation of the court, even more than a sixth of a mistake, it's still a valid sale. Because we hold like Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, Diyamar Mechron Kayim b'Meseches Ksubis Perak Almon and Izonis. Again, Rav Shimon ben Gamliel was the one we said and quoted on the previous summit. Rav Shimon ben Gamliel said in Meseches Ksubis that the sale is good. V'lo svira leila Rava. The point over here is he doesn't hold. Rava does not hold Hadamar Rav Nachman La'el, of that which Rav Nachman said before, Halacha Kedivrei Chachamim, that the halacha is like the Chacham. He doesn't hold like that. He holds the halacha is like Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, that we say that the sale is valid. That which we say that if it's a mistake by a sixth, you have to return the fraud. Lo amru ela b'metaltali. That's only true by movable objects. Ona ksiva bohen. That's where we find the pasuk talks about ona by movable property. Okana miyad amisecha altonu davar hanikna miyad liyad. We learn from the word yad that we're talking about movable property, something that moves from one hand to the other. But iluya, and again, that's only true by land where we don't apply ona if there was a mistake in terms of the valuation. They didn't take a rope and divide everything by measuring the property. Rather, they evaluated the property. This one took the bad property, but he took more of it, and the other one took the better property, he took less of it, and they had evaluated in terms of what it's worth. So there we say there's no ona. But if it was a problem in measurement, so then choser, then we actually do retract it. That's not like normal ona. The kaimel and bahazah pachos mishasus machalinish. We say by regular ona, if it's a mistake less than a six, people are mochel. To asamein kol adam yochel et samtzim adam. By valuations, nothing can be exact. Aval toa b'mida, but if there's a mistake in a measurement, tosu, that's a real mistake. V'adaita da'achi loav, and nobody is going into a deal on the understanding there might be something wrong with the measurement, and so therefore, if something is off by the measurement, we certainly would retract that negotiation. And the Gemara continues, but what about that which we learned in the Mishnah, Hashaleach es ha'be'ira? If somebody sends a fire biyad chereshot of a cotton in the hands of a deaf mute or an imbecile or a minor, these are individuals without das, so if that does damage, pater midinei adam, he's pater in terms of the courts, v'chayev b'dinei shamayim, but he's chayev in the laws of heaven, he's chayev in terms of dinei shamayim, but shilach biyad pikeach, let's say he sends the fire in the hands of a pikeach, somebody who has understanding, somebody who has das, in that case, pikeach chayev, the pikeach is going to be chayev. And so the Gemara asks, V'amai, why is that the case? If somebody sends a fire with a pikeach, nemo shlucho shaladam kemosa, why don't we apply the principle of shlichus, and we say that the shliach, the agent, is like the person himself, and the person who sent the shliach, the person who sent the pikeach, should be chayev. And the Gemara answers to that, Shani Hasam, it's different over there, the Ein Shliach Lidvar Avera. Because we say that there's no Shliach when it comes to an Avera. Over here he's sending this Pikach, and the Pikach is then doing the damage. We don't say that the person who sent the Pikach is Chayiv. We say there is no Shlichus when it comes to an Avera. The Aminim, because we say Divrei Harav, Divrei Talmud, Divrei Mishomim. If you have the words of the master and the words of the student, who do you listen to? Of course you listen to the master. And in this case, the master is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and the student is the one who's sending the Shliach. Who's the Shliach supposed to listen to? Obviously HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And if the Shliach doesn't listen to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in this case, if the Pikeach is going to do the damage, then the Pikeach is going to be liable, not the person who sent him. And the Gemara continues, V'had Tanya, but what about that which we learned in the following Brayso? So the Bach changes it to V'had Tznan, that which we learned in the following Mishnah. Shliach shelo asa shlichu. So let's say you have a person sends a Shliach, but the Shliach did not do what he was supposed to do, and he committed the act of Me'ilah, he misused the property of Hektish. So then Shliach mal, it's considered the Shliach is the one that committed the Me'ilah. But asa shlichusa, but if he did what he was sent to do, so Balabayas mal, the Balabayas is the one that's considered to have committed the act of Me'ilah. He's the one that sent the Shliach did what he said, and so there we are employing the concept of Shlichus, even though it's an Aveira. And so the Gemara asks, Kiyasa Shlichusa de Balabayis. Balabayis miyamal. It says if the Shliach does what the Balabayis wanted him to do, the Balabayis does indeed, he has committed Me'ilah. Amai, why is that the case? Neima in Shliach, Lidvar Aveira. Why don't we say the concept that there's no Shliach for a Dvar Aveira? And the Gemara answers, Shani Me'ilah, it's different by Me'ilah, the Alpha, Chet Mitruma. We learn out of Gzeir Shava, Chet from Truma. It says the word Chet by Truma, it says the word Chet by Me'ilah. Ma Truma, Mashvi Shliach, just like by Truma we say there's a concept of Shlichus, Af Me'ilah, Mashvi Shliach. So too by Me'ilah there's a concept of Shliach, there's a concept of Shlichus, even though it's a Dvar Avera. But the Gemara says, V'neiluf Mina, but why don't we learn from there? If there's a concept of Shlichus Lidvar Avera by Me'ilah, we should learn to all other cases the same thing. And the Gemara says to that, Misham to have a Me'ilah Shlichus Yad Shnei Ksuvim Haboim Ke'echad. The reason is because it's not only by Me'ilah, it's also by Shlichus Yad. Shlichus Yad is, let's say a person is watching a Pikadon and he does something inappropriate, he misuses the Pikadon, so then he's liable for anything that happens to that Pikadon, to that deposit. So over there also we have the concept of Shlichus Lidvar Aveira, and so therefore it's Shnei Ksuvim Haboim Ke'echad. It's two psukim that teach essentially the same thing. V'chol Shnei Ksuvim Haboim Ke'echad ein malamdin. Anytime you have Shnei Ksuvim Haboim Ke'echad, you can't learn out to other cases, because the whole point is we taught it in case number 1, and then we also taught it in case number 2. We didn't learn out case number 2 from case number 1, and that's to say that it only applies in those 2 cases and no other cases. And the Gemara explains, Me'ilah hada'amr. Me'ilah, we already said, that's an example where we do say there's Shlichus Lidvar Aveira. Shlichus Yad Maihi, what's the example? Where do we find that by Shlichus Yad, by using this Pikadon in an inappropriate manner, where do we find over there that there's a concept of Shlichus Lidvar Aveira? Titania, that's because we learned in the following Brayso, I'll call Devar Pesha, when it talks about deposits, Pikdonos, it says if he does any sin, he does anything wrong in terms of watching the deposit. Beis Shammai say that pasuk of I'll call Devar Pesha is to say that a person is liable even on thoughts, just like actions. But Beis Hillel say, it's not true, there has to be an action. He's only liable when he actually sends forth his hand. Shenemar, as it says in the pasuk, Im lo shalach yado, it uses this phrase, Im lo shalach yado, he has to actually take action. It's not enough just to think of it. Amru Beis Shammai leBeis Hillel, Beis Shammai say to Beis Hillel, V'alo nemar I'll call Devar Pesha, but it says I'll call Devar Pesha. It sounds like even Machshava. Amru lem Beis Hillel Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel say back to Beis Shammai, V'alo nemar Im lo shalach yado v'melaches reyeyu. But it also says in the pasuk he has to send forth his hand. It sounds like there has to be an action. Amru Beis Shammai leBeis Hillel, Beis Shammai say to Beis Hillel, and Cain, if so, I'll call Devar Pesha lamali. So what do you do with the phrase I'll call Devar Pesha? And the answer is sheyachol. Beis Hillel say back, because I might think ein li elahu, I might think that's only true by him, he himself. Amar la'avdo v'lishlucha minayin. What if he tells his servant? What if he tells his messenger to send forth his hand to use the pikadon in a way that's not allowed? How do we know he's liable in that case? Talmud lomer I'll call Devar Pesha. So that's what Beis Hillel say. That's what we learn from Al Kol Dvar Pesha, not like Beis Shammai who learn that the person's liable for Machshava, but rather that there even is a concept of Shlichus, even though it's a Dvar Aveira, and that's why it's Shnei Ksuvim Haboim Ke'echad. According to Beis Hillel, you have this case over here by Shlichus Yad and by Me'ila, the concept of Shlichus L'Dvar Aveira only by these two circumstances, but nowhere else. And the Gemara says, Hanichol leBeis Hillel, that's good according to Beis Hillel. Elo leBeis Shammai, Temukmi leila hai krab machshava kemaisa, but according to Beis Shammai, they say this pasuk of Al Kol Dvar Pesha by Shlichus Yad has nothing to do with Shlichus, it has to do with the fact that machshava is the same as Maisa. And Rashi explains again, Avalimaso shlichuso balabayas small. If the person does what the balabayas asked him by meila, so then the balabayas is considered to have committed meila. Umevi korban meila, he has to bring a korban for the meila. Chet mitruma. We learn out shlichus by dvar aver by meila. That's a gzeira shava from truma. Lerov dvarim hi lemud mitruma. Rashi points out that most things when it comes to meila are learned from truma. The Meseches meila. That's found in Meseches meila. Ksevacha v'chata b'shkaga mikadshei Hashem. It uses this word v'chata b'shkaga when it's talking about Me'ila, it says v'lo yisu olav chet by Truma, and therefore we make this gezei reshava chet. And Beis Shammai say when it comes to shlichus yad, l'chayiv ala machshava, the person is chayiv even when it comes to thought. O al hadibur, let's say comes to speech as well. Shem amar o chashav, if a person either says or thinks, l'shloach yad b'bikadon, he thinks that he's going to send forth his hand and use a deposit. He's supposed to be watching this deposit, and instead he uses it for himself, but he doesn't actually use it for himself. He just thinks to use it for himself. Harehu b'reshus, so according to Beis Shammai, that's in his reshus. Ma'osa shav va'elach, from that moment on, lihischayev b'cholons, and he's now chayev on any accident that happens to that deposit. Sheyalubo, any accident that happens, he is chayev for. Afilu have a shomer chinam, even if he's a shomer chinam, he's just watching it for free. Shlo haya chayev arach shavel b'pshia. Shomer chinam is generally only chayev in pshia, negligence, but now the fact that he thought to use it, he's now chayev even in onsen. Ainli shenes chayev b'onsen b'shlichus yad el bizman shesholach b'yad hu atzmo. And then Beis Hillel say, I only know this concept of shlichus yad, that the person watching it is chayev in onsen if he himself sends forth his hand. How do we know if he tells his servant or he tells his shliach? And again, that Beis Hillel learns from the pasuk of Al Kol Devar Pesha, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Mem Gimel Amud Aleph.